Can we all just settle down, please? Could everyone just settle into their chairs, please? And we have some silence. As we can see, we've got a formidable panel of the superior agenda here today. Starting off with Maliha Lodhi, who is, as everyone knows, a distinguished journalist who subsequently went into diplomacy and has now returned to the media. She served as Pakistan's former ambassador in Washington and as a High Commissioner in London, and is now Senior International Advisor for the Jung Group. Beside her is, and to my right, is Aisha Siddiqa, whom I'm sure everyone knows as the author of Military Inc., the book that was published in 2007. She's an academic and a columnist. She also serves as a military and political analyst. And finally, to my left is Tahir Abdullah, tormentor of dictators, misogynist thugs, and Islamabad's preeminent civil society activist. In many ways, it behooves us to raise this question today, as in the months since Salman Taseer's murder, there's been a lot written and a lot said about Pakistan, whether there's been a failure of the imagination, whether we are living a nightmare, what has happened to Pakistan's dream, and at the same time, in a completely different context elsewhere, we are seeing people from Tunisia to Egypt and elsewhere reimagining their own countries. But I will leave it to the speakers to decide what they make of the question itself and what it means to them. We'll start first with Dr. Lodhi.
Thank you. Thank you, Umar. Is this all right? I'm delighted to be here on an all-female panel. If we'd knocked out Umar and had another female to moderate us, it would have packed a lot more punch.
My apologies.
But let me start with a line from Alice in Wonderland, which goes something like this. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. I think today's turmoil and turbulence is such that there is very little thinking going on that is warranted by the situation that we confront today. So I think what Umar said, and this session today, is an extremely important one, because it's devoted to the question of us asking ourselves, how is it that we imagine or reimagine Pakistan's future? What kind of a Pakistan do we want to see? I think the first principle must surely be that reimagining Pakistan must start by reversing the despondency that our nation has sunk into. Unless this is reversed, how can we marshal both the intellectual and political resources to have a vision that inspires hope for the future, that inspires the kind of national self-confidence that we seem to have lost? So I think there is no greater need today than to reimagine Pakistan's future. Equally, there is no greater need today than to re-invoke Jinnah's Pakistan, Jinnah's vision of what Pakistan was supposed to be. And I'm not going to spend time on this. I will only refer to a debate that is going on. We mustn't underestimate and underappreciate the fact that there is a debate of sorts. It should be much wider, it should be greater, about Jinnah's Pakistan. Are we losing it? Have we lost it? How do we re-establish it? How do we reclaim it? But I do want to draw a distinction very quickly between a dream and a vision. What I'm going to say, and what I have said about Jinnah's Pakistan, is not to invoke a mythical past or to recapture a lost dream. It is to invoke a vision. A dream inspires hope, but sometimes it's not implementable. A vision has to be implementable. It's a roadmap. It gives us the means to empower ourselves and to prepare ourselves for the future. So I want to make two broad points before I hand over to my other distinguished colleagues. The first I want to talk about quickly is a paradox that lies at the very heart of Pakistan's predicament today. And that I describe as a weak state, but a strong society. And I think there can be no greater testimony of this than what we have seen here all day today. If this is not the expression of a nation that is alive, of a nation that really can think for itself, I think we can find no better illustration of the fact that this is a lively and dynamic society. I think the great floods of last year provide us with the other example of how, when the state and the government foundered, society came through. And I'm not going to go into any detail because you're well aware. You're well aware of what happened at that time. It was the response, in contrast to the anemic response of the official machinery. It was the stellar contribution of civil society, the business community, ordinary citizens to come to the rescue of the flood victims that really should have made all of us very proud of ourselves. So I think this offers a stunning contrast to faltering, weakening, or weaker state. There is another way in which a strong society is being juxtaposed to a weakening state or an eroding state. And this has to do with the changes that we're all living through today. The changes that have been brought about by socioeconomic factors, despite successive governments, not necessarily because of them. These changes are changes of modern communications, changes in the broadcast media that is creating a more connected and a more empowered society. We simply know more about each other and about the world than we ever did. And it's connecting us in ways that I think we need to talk up our confidence all the time rather than talk it down. I think the moment has passed for us to keep diagnosing what's wrong with us, but to look at what's right with us. And here, I think a strong society has to do more than it's done in the last few years, which is simply to compensate for the inadequacies of the state or the government machinery. It has to become a powerful force for change in the way that we are governed and push for urgently needed reforms. Because for me, a reimagined Pakistan is a reformed Pakistan. And this brings me to my second point, which is, despite all our challenges and our problems, and we've had more than our share, some self-created, some not self-created. And I think we must be clear on that, instead of beating up on us all the time. We have much to answer for, but we've also been the victims of much that has happened, over which we had little control. We may not have planned well, but we cannot attribute all that is wrong to us. We can attribute much that is wrong to us. So this brings me to my second point. And in any case, I think the means to self-empowerment, the means to national self-confidence lies in your self-belief. If we lose the belief in ourselves, all is lost. So my second point, quickly, I know Umar will get very impatient, I think comes from the point that we have been a country which has been more than one that simply lurches from crisis to crisis. That even in the midst of these crises, the level of functionality at the level of society has been constant. Dysfunctionality was at the level of the state and at the level of the government. Our society functioned, continues to function, despite and not because of a dysfunctionality. So I think the levels and layers of analysis that we adopt to look at ourselves in order to reimagine the future is critical. Otherwise, we will fall into deep depression out of which we will not be able to emerge. And I don't want to really rattle off what are the elements of our strength and the sources of our strength. We have an energetic free media, and as I said before, we have a lively arts, literature, and music scene. We have, in spurts, achieved high rates of economic growth, not nearly enough to attack poverty, not nearly enough to control our exploding population growth rate, but enough to give us some attributes, not sufficient, but some attributes of a modern nation. And I think we must always keep that side of the ledger in view as we examine ourselves. I think the difference between a successful nation and a successful state and an unsuccessful or a failing or a faltering one is good governance, is effective governance. That's what makes the difference between successful states and not so successful ones. And here, I do want to make a cluster of related points, which leads me to my final point of the need for reform in any reimagined Pakistan. And that has to do with the nature of representational politics in our country, which tends to produce what I call a democracy deficit. And here, before somebody attacks me, I think the choice for us is not between military rule and civilian democracy. That's a false choice. That's a false paradigm. The choice is between a functional democracy that is for everyone, chosen by everyone, but for everyone, and a dysfunctional democracy chosen by everyone, but for only some. Why do we produce this paradox? The reason is that representational politics in Pakistan is based on patronage. It is clientelist, and clientelist systems are basically based on trading political support for favors. It is necessarily local and parochial. It is inimical to thinking about national issues or national ways of solving problems. And most importantly, patronage-based systems may have worked in a different era and a different time. They are dysfunctional to the complex challenges of the era that we live in. So I do think that unless we are able to move away through electoral reforms, through political reforms, towards the kind of representational politics that reflects, one, the demographic reality of Pakistan, where the economic center of gravity has shifted from the rural to the urban centers, and where we are able to move away from patronage and towards thinking about policy aimed at benefiting all the citizenry, not some of the citizenry, in a patronage system. It is very difficult then to reimagine the kind of modern Pakistan that I think many of us in this room would like to see. So I would say this will have to be achieved through political reform, through electoral reform. And I think in redesigning this polity, two things will have to remain critical. First, that democracy will not function without the rule of law. There is no democracy without the rule of law. The two have to go together, or one perishes, or both perish. And secondly, that the military will have to subject itself to civilian oversight. But equally, the political class will have to stop asking the military to intervene to resolve its disputes. So I'll round off by saying that what we also need to secure our future is a new national narrative, and we heard much talk in the earlier session about narratives. We need a national narrative of hope, not despondency. And that comes from action. That comes from steps to reform, to rectify, and to revive ourselves. And the most important thing that we need to revive is an intangible. It is our self-belief. It is our confidence that we can transform ourselves and transform our society. We need to build a culture that pulls up rather than pulls down the nation's confidence. And ultimately, it's nations that believe in themselves that have the means to seize and transform their destiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lodi. And now over to Dr. Aisha Siddiqa. How do you reimagine Pakistan?
That's a difficult one. I was watching this documentary at the dinner last night, which referred to, yes, things are bad, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. There's some bright spots here and there. Dr. Lodi also talked about not being despondent, and I was thinking, the report, the recent UN report, is that parts of Sindh are Chad-like in terms of malnutrition. We've just had a governor killed. We cannot really, the government itself cannot publicly support the committees it has made itself to look into the blasphemy issue. and then we talk about despondency. My head spins. I'm trying to do in my time is to raise actually two questions. Yes, Pakistan can be reimagined. It can be the greatest nation in Asia. In fact, there are changes which are rapidly taking place in Asia, in larger Asian continent. There is ASEAN, which is already talking about bringing down, barriers for, people's free movement. So all of that is happening. And so where are we going to go? And the question which I want to raise, the first question